Welcome to Beyond Sport with Fiona Stewart. If you've been listening for a while, welcome back. If you're new to the show, I'm your host Fiona. My passion for sport really started when I was a competitive swimmer. This led me to study sport development at university whilst also working within the sporting industry. I'm a huge believer in sport being used as a tool for good. Each week, I'll bring you an episode with someone involved in the sporting world. It could be your local high school teacher or your childhood or current sporting hero. The difference is that it's not your typical type of questions. We talk about the highs and lows in their journey through sport, but also what they've learned from it and how it's made them who they are today. There's also a strong focus on how being involved in sport can impact the community. If you haven't already, make sure you hit follow wherever you're listening so you don't miss the drop of each new episode. If you're after some bonus content, then you can check out our Instagram or Facebook page at Beyond Sport with Fiona Stewart. A few weeks ago, I had the absolute pleasure of chatting to Winter Olympian BREE WALKER. Now, BREE started on the track as a junior, but she was determined to represent her country and made the switch over to bobsleigh. In this episode, BREE takes us through her journey and what it's been like experiencing all the highs and lows that come along with being an elite athlete. She also takes us through some of the incredible lessons she's learnt along the way. Coming from Australia, where winter sports are not always the most funded or accessible sports to participate in, it's been really interesting having the opportunity to chat with some of Australia's most recent Winter Olympians. If you're a snow sport fan, make sure you also check out my chats with Sevi DeCampo and Jessica Yeaton after you've listened to this episode with BREE. Let's get into it. So BREE, can you tell us about your sport and how you got into it?
So I am the Australian bobsleigh pilot. So I compete in the two-man and the new event in the last Olympics, the monobob event. Which is a one-person event, which was really exciting to be included for the last Olympic cycle. And yeah, I started bobsleigh back in 2016, and really it's just been such a roller coaster of a ride. It's been so exciting. I've traveled the world. I've met so many great people and been able to compete for my country all in one. So it's been, just a fantastic journey so far.
Yeah, and you're over in Europe at the moment, but I want to start back at the very, very start. You didn't always compete in a winter sport, so where did you start off?
Yeah, I actually started as a 400-meter runner, 400-meter hurdler, and I've been competing in that at a senior level for quite a few years. Quite successful. I competed at a state and national level, won a few medals there. I actually even got a full scholarship over to America, which I was on a full track and field scholarship there, which was a fantastic experience. But actually, I really got quite slow there. I was quite injured, and just simply because of the way that they train there, it's more weights based, and I haven't done a lot of weights up until that point. And I knew my body type. I knew that I look at weights and I put on weight. And I said to the coach there, I was like, look, if you throw me in the gym, I'm going to get quite heavy and probably quite slow. And he was like, no, not with our structure, not how we do it. Just trust us. I was like, okay, I'll trust the process. I'm all about that. Anyways, then a year, fast forward a year. And yeah, it was exactly that. I got quite slow. I actually ran, my season opener was the slowest 400 I'd run since I was 16. And I was like, okay, this is me done. It's time for me to go home. So I headed back home, and I don't know, I kind of lost the fire for track and field. I actually started training with a new coach, Peter Fortune, and who was Kathy Freeman's old coach. And so I was like, and she's a huge role model for me. And so I was so excited to be training with him. And he's like, look, we've got a lot of work to do to get back to where you were. So we'll give it a go. Let's see what we go. But maybe you would be better suited to something else. And, at that stage, AFL was coming through. Even rugby was coming through a little bit. And my dad's a Queenslander, so I'm sure he would have loved me to go off and do women's rugby. And so, but I was like, I was hell-bent on representing Australia in track and field. I was like, no, I love 400 hurdles. I really want to go and do compete for Australia in 400 meter hurdles. So let's go with this. I'm like, okay, sure. And so we tried a little bit, but I was watching the Rio Olympics, and Kim Brennan actually won the single sculls event there, and they were telling her story, and they were telling her how she was a 400 meter hurdler and how she transitioned over to rowing because she was injured.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh, maybe my talents lie elsewhere. And so I simply just Googled whether we had an Australian bobsleigh team. And because bobsleigh was always something that I thought I'd do after my athletic career, but I was like, look, I'm young. I still have so much more to give, but I keep hitting these roadblocks with like injuries. And like I said, the fire had kind of just like burnt out a little bit. So I just signed up for the talent identification camp that they had going because they wanted to revamp the team for the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics. And yeah, a month later, I went up to Sydney and I competed in the all the testing there. And they were like, yep, you're a good fit. Would you like to go over to Whistler in a month and learn how to drive a bobsleigh? And so I said, yeah, sure. And so I had to raise all this money to be able to do this. And so I did like fundraising and worked really hard and found sponsors and everything. And then, yeah, a month later I was over in Whistler and went down on my first bobsleigh ride.
Oh my gosh. Well, good on you for not giving up on the dream when you're injured. There's so many people, and I was probably one of them, that when I got injured, I was kind of like, oh, like maybe this isn't my sport, and I didn't really look into another one. I probably pigeonholed myself into the one sport and went into coaching. So I still stayed involved, but took a step back from the athletic lifestyle. But good on you for like finding another sport. And it's cool that 400 meter hurdles transfers over to bobsled, because in my head I'm like, they're so different.
Yeah, but in hindsight, I think 400 meter hurdles was the wrong event for me. Like, if you look at my body type, if you look at the kind of athlete, especially I am now, I just didn't train very well as a track and field athlete. I think if I had the knowledge that I have now and then also the coaching that I have now, I think I would have been able to be a much better 100 meter runner, 200 meter runner. I actually really enjoyed doing 150s, 150s. They were the best training sessions. And so I think I could have been quite a good 200 meter runner. But that you live and you learn. And I think now bobsleigh is a perfect sport for me. It's a perfect combination of power and speed. And I have a lot of power, and I've developed my speed over the years. And that's what's made me quite a good pusher. And the challenges that bobsleigh has with learning how to drive on different tracks provides me like the excitement and motivation that I loved about hurdles, because hurdles, like, you have to get your technique right, and there's all these different kind of elements to it. And so, yeah, everything that I loved about 400 meter hurdles, I've been able to love about bobsleigh now.
Oh, that's incredible. And I guess it flows on to my next question is like, was there a specific moment you were like, okay, bobsleigh's my thing, this is my sport?
Yeah, it was. I don't think it was an exact moment. I think it was over time. It was over, especially that first season. Like, the first season when I got introduced into the sport, I didn't really we didn't really compete. We didn't do a hell of a lot of sliding. It was just kind of getting to know the sport.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but what I did see was my progression in the sport. So when you first start on a new track, you start lower down the track and you begin to like drive down the track. And then when you learn that part of the track, you move up a little bit higher. And that's really motivating, So you like begin down the bottom and then you get good at that. And the coaches say, yeah, you can move up. And so then you start to move up and then you're like, oh, I'm getting better. And so then you just start to see your progressions, like physically see the progression of your hard work. And I just loved that. And then when I eventually got to the top of my first track in Whistler, I was like so excited because I was just like, wow, look how far I'd come. I started all the way down there and now I'm all the way up here. And I think that maybe could have been the moment. Like when I hit the top and I went down on my first run, that's when I could have been like, yeah, I love this sport. I love what it's about. And then I think it was just over the years of like exposing myself to different environments. So I like would start on Europa Cup and North American Cup, which is the lower tier race level. And then when you do your first World Cup, which is the top tier, that's really exciting. So again, you physically see your progression in the sport. And I think you just get like when you physically get to see your progression of all your hard work, that's really motivating and that's exciting. And you don't really, I guess you do get that in track and field. But I guess it's a little bit more visible in bobsleigh, for me anyways.
Yeah, I like that. And it's really cool. Like when you were saying you get to, move further and progress further, like I've been a learn to swim teacher for 11, 12 years. And that's the thing, like when the kids are learning to swim, they go from swimming 3 meters to 5 meters and you move the distance further back. And I was just thinking like how motivating that is hearing it from you.
Yeah.
You get to move the track further and further until you're not swimming, but you're going the whole run, or the kids are swimming the whole lap. Like it's the same kind of principles.
Yeah, and I think you do. I kind of would take back what I said. You do get that in track and field, like you and sorry, in hurdles, because you progress the height, you progress the distance, and you do get that. I don't know. I just think because I hit 400-meter hurdles at the top, at that senior level, so my height couldn't increase anymore. The distance obviously doesn't increase anymore. I could obviously progress to different races, but in bobsleigh also you have all these different tracks, and some tracks are known as being harder, and some tracks are known as being easier. And when you're hitting the easier tracks and you're being successful, you're like, oh, this is awesome. But then you go to a harder track and you're very humbled. You're like, oh, that was a really hard track. But then when you start to get better at those harder tracks, you're like, oh, I'm getting better. And so there's a lot of different elements to get better at in bobsleigh compared to 400-meter hurdles, because 400-meter hurdles, it's the same track, it's the same height of hurdles in the same distance.
Yeah, the variability of it is different. Like it's the same, whether it's the Sydney track or the one, I don't even know what the Melbourne one is, the Lakeside Stadium one.
Yeah, they're all the same distance. It's 400-meter hurdles.
Yeah, there's not much difference. It's probably the weather that causes the biggest difference there. But
Yes.
So in terms of your training, like did that change significantly? Like obviously you've got doing the runs and progressing them. Did you train like as a team? How did you get into this, like the monobob? How did that happen?
So in the beginning, the training obviously became quite different from 400-meter hurdles to bobsleigh, because bobsleigh we're only really training for the 30-meter push start. And that's all we're training all summer or Australian winter for, is just this 30-meter push start. So obviously my training had to, like, the distances and the type of training had to change quite significantly. But why a lot of 400-meter, why a lot of track and field athletes transfer over to bobsleigh is the training is quite similar. And so in the beginning, yes, my distances and the type of training did change, but I was used to that kind of training before. Like I'd done that kind of training before. I'd done short, sharp sprints. I've done plyometrics, and I had done a lot of weightlifting at that stage anyways. And so that was all very similar. But when I guess I kind of started getting more bobsleigh specific training, that was about 2018. The training became quite different, and I really started to specialize in the specific bobsleigh training, working on different working on your acceleration angles, became really quite specific, and you're looking for certain acceleration angles to be able to get as much force to push the sled forward. And then, just different other elements became really quite specific. And so, I think as I got better and better at the sport, my training has changed quite a lot. In terms of monobob actually started in 2018. It was due to the women in the sport, they wanted equal opportunity to be able to go for 2 medals at the Olympics. There was a lot of women that were fighting to compete in the 4-man event, which would have been awesome. Like, I would have loved being able to drive a 4-man. But for Australians, it's already hard to get women into the sport or get people into the sport. So for me to be able to try and get not only a 2-man team together, but a 4-man team together would have been so difficult. And besides, those sleds cost 2 times as much as a 2-man sled. And so really, as much as it would have been awesome to be able to compete in the 4-man event, it wasn't realistic for Australia. But monobob was, and monobob was how I actually started the sport, and it usually was used as a training tool to be able to get people so people could learn how to drive.
Yeah.
And so people did think it was a regression in the sport, and I could see why they think that. But also for us, it was perfect because in the beginning, the sleds were like provided and all the sleds were standardized. And so they were all exactly the same across the board. And so we didn't have any disadvantages from the lack of like high quality equipment. So really it was just the athlete that was being tested, and which was awesome for us. And so the first ever monobob competitions, I went out and I was able to win. And that was an amazing moment for not just me, but for like my supporters and like the stakeholders that like had helped me get to that point. They were like, wow, we're actually supporting an athlete who can actually go on and be competitive overseas against like these winter sport nations. And from that point on, I just like, again, I just was so motivated to keep pushing and pushing and pushing to be able to be competitive with the best in the world.
It's funny you mentioned that because Australia isn't the biggest known winter sport. I know I'm down in Melbourne, which is, you know, arguably the coldest area. But my knowledge on winter sports is so low because I guess we don't have a really big scene of it down here compared to other countries. So how did you find the training, because you probably had to relocate, and then B, competing for that? It was awesome that you can have a standardized machine and sled, because it means that we're not at that disadvantage because we haven't put the funding into the research for the equipment.
Yeah. No, it was really great that they were able to standardize the equipment, because you have some of these big nations that have so much money that can invest so much into the technology, and that just puts us smaller nations at such a disadvantage. And so I guess like for me, that was really motivating, because it was just like, it's on you, girl. Like you have to go out there and do everything that you possibly can to be able to win a medal. And so, yeah, I guess that's been really awesome, because then we've been able to go and be successful and get more exposure. And then people are excited to see like Australians being successful in winter sports. And there has been so much success in winter sports, especially over the last 4 years. And then we had such a fantastic Olympics. And I think, not that I knew much because I was off social media during the Olympics, but there was a lot of exposure around the Winter Olympics and the athletes, and highlighting certain athletes who were successful. And that's so great for our sport and for our whole Winter Olympic Institute. And I hope that it just continues over the next 4 years as we head to the next Winter Olympics, which is in Milano Cortina in 2026.
I think it certainly will. And yeah, I totally agree. I was not off social media. I was watching the Winter Olympics, and the coverage was a lot more than what I've seen in previous years. And I was able to, you know, see the backstories of some of the athletes and go, oh my gosh, like, wow, how incredible is this? And that, in saying that, like the coverage for Tokyo Summer Olympics did step it up as well, but I found it a little bit more equal compared to previous Olympic cycles.
Yeah, and I also think that because we don't have a massive team, you know, like we're like, I think, what do we have, like 40, 50 athletes? Like there wasn't that many. And so then that allows I guess, Channel 7 to do little spotlights on certain athletes, and you get to know their background stories, because there's a lot of time that they have to fill. And so why not fill it with background stories of athletes and get to know the athletes and find out their journey? Because then, like, you know, maybe there's a little girl or little boy out there that's thinking the same things that I was when I transferred over to bobsleigh, and or like any other athlete that transferred over, if they did. And then it goes on and inspires other people to then go off and chase their dreams, and maybe in a different way than they thought. And you don't know that unless you know the background stories. All you can see is them standing at the end of on the podium or at the end of their competition, and you say, oh, well done, that's amazing, but you don't know how the athlete got there. And so I think it's really important to be able to share the journey with the people who follow you.
You've hit the nail right in the head there. That was, yes, exactly what I was thinking, is being able to share the journey will inspire that next generation sitting there going, oh, this could be for me. Or like, oh, yeah, maybe this isn't the right sport for me. I didn't realize this other thing was a sport. How do I do that? And just like you did, do a quick Google, and then it's on to the next thing in their path.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I'm really about. Like, I was always so inspired by athletes and their journeys, and that's what fires me up. Like, I watch movies, and I'm a big, like, I love documentaries, and so I watch documentaries on athletes and all that kind of stuff. And I just love hearing people's background stories and their journeys. And so I try and do that as much as possible on my social media platforms, to be able to hopefully inspire somebody else to go out there and chase their dreams. And that's, I hope I do that. I hope I am successful in doing that, because that's what I'm trying to do anyways.
I'm certainly inspired right now. And winter's coming up down here, so who knows? So can you tell us a little bit about the last Winter Olympics? Was a few months ago, how you went, because you competed in 2 events.
Yeah, so I competed in the monobob and the 2-man. And monobob I came 5th, and the 2-man I came 16th.
5th is incredible. Like, I hear that and I'm like, for an Australian to come 5th in the Winter Olympics is like, that's a gold medal to me, to be honest.
I mean, I would have obviously loved the medal, and that's what we were going for. That was the big aim. But I must admit, at the beginning of the Olympic cycle, I just wanted to make it to the Olympics, because I don't know whether you know, but for the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics in 2018, I actually missed out. We actually qualified through the international standards, and we could have gone and competed, because at that stage, Australia could have competed in a continental position. So the International Federation provided a quota position to a country from Africa and a country from, I guess, Australia or Oceania. And so we could have competed, but our national federation didn't nominate us to go and compete, which was really disappointing. They said that we weren't really ready, and we didn't hit some of their in-house standards to be able to go and compete. So that was really heartbreaking. But obviously, I was extremely motivated to be able to make the next Olympics. That's all that I had on my mind, was just making the Beijing Olympics. And so in the beginning, that was the goal. But then when monobob got introduced into the Olympic cycle, and then as the years progressed and I started hitting podiums more consistently, especially at that World Cup level, I was like, actually, I think I can do something special at these Olympics. And so it was kind of like 2 years out, and I got a new head coach. And he was like, you know what, like, you could do something special at these Olympics if we play this game right. And so that then became the new goal. So I guess once I got to the Winter Olympics and I was competing in the monobob event, obviously getting a medal was the new overarching goal. But I guess that hasn't been my goal from the beginning now. Now that is my new goal. That's what I'm going for the next Winter Olympics. is the medal. So now that's all I have in my foremind is just going for medal at the next Winter Olympics, and even like a world championship medal, like that is also, I guess, a stepping stone. Like, I guess you have to do some stepping stones in order to be able to reach your big goal. And so I'm currently doing that. I'm currently setting my goals and setting my stepping stones in order to be able to achieve those goals. And that's a really exciting process. It's exhausting. Like, it actually, to write some goals down and, think about what you want to do over the next 4 years can be quite exhausting and confronting. But it's a really important part of the process, because I guess on the days when you're unmotivated and you're tired and you're sore, if you think of those goals, if you think of like why your why, then that's what gets you up out of bed and gets you to the track or gets you to the gym and keeps you working hard.
Yes, and that goes for every single sport out there. And it's cool that you've
Certainly.
broken it down into the stepping stones, because it's daunting going, I want a podium finish at the next Olympics or World Champs. But then if you go, okay, so how am I going to do that? And you break it down, then okay, well, for the week, I need to hit this many training sessions and I need to get this many hours of sleep and I need to do this many recovery sessions.
Yes.
And it becomes a little bit easier.
Yeah, definitely. And it's really important to reflect on what you did last time. And so it's like, okay, well, last time, like for me, for example, I was always really working hard on like on the season plan, and because a lot of the stuff that we had to organize, I had to do that myself. I had a coach helping me out, but still I had to help organize logistics and funding and all that kind of stuff. I didn't have a big lot of funding or an institute that was supporting me with so much money. I had to go out and source out sponsors and think of clever ways and how to get what I needed in order to be able to compete at a high level. And so I'd forget to eat, because I was sitting at my computer just like working. And I was like, right, you weren't fueling yourself correctly. Next time around, you need to fuel yourself correctly. So I've been working really hard with my dietitian in order to be able to create plans and make things a lot easier. So like I've even got shopping lists that are connected to like meal plans that I don't even need to think about like what I need to buy. It's right there. And it just makes things a lot easier. And so that's just one example of how reflecting on what I did last time is going to hopefully be able to help me in the future.
Yeah, and I like that you've taken it in such a positive way. It's like, oh, I didn't fail or something. It's, I'm going to build on what I had last time. That's my base level, and we're going to improve. Like, the result's going to improve because I'm going to improve my processes.
Yeah, definitely. And like maybe like some kind of improvements don't necessarily help your results, but at least you've tried. At least you've reflected on maybe something that you thought wasn't good, and then you're like, okay, well, maybe if I just make this small change, maybe it will improve the result next time. If it doesn't, okay, that's fine. Reflect and go again. It's all just, it's not about making mistakes. It's just about, just constant reflection and constant improvements.
Yeah, and making the journey enjoyable and sustainable.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm all about enjoying the journey. If I'm not enjoying the journey, then you can forget it. My results are bad. I'm a miserable person. I'm grumpy to be around. So there's been times, like even last season, it was some really hard times that I wasn't really enjoying the journey, and I just would sit down with my team and I'm like, look here, I'm not enjoying this. Like at the moment, this is really hard work. What can we do to make this more enjoyable? But if you don't express that, then nobody knows and nobody can make a change and nobody can help you. And that's one promise that I'm trying to keep to myself, is being more honest with myself and then also the people who help me, and in saying that, look, guys, like this isn't working right now. What can we do to change to make this, more enjoyable? Because my results aren't going to matter if I'm not enjoying this.
Yeah, and that takes a bit of courage to do that. Like, it's not an easy thing to, one, be honest with yourself when you're so passionate and determined for, you know, not even the results, but like you've got that goal, but then to say and vocalize it to others and go, okay, like I'm not happy, we need to change something up so that we can get to where we need to be.
And I think that's really important, why you need to have your people around you, like the people that you trust, because if you don't trust your team and you don't trust your people, then you can't express yourself in those hard times. And so it's really important that you first have your support network and make sure that they're people that you trust. And then, you know, be brave enough to vocalize if you're not doing okay. Or be brave enough to vocalize if somebody isn't doing something that is good. You know, that's also something that's hard because they may not know, but if you haven't vocalized it, then it's not their fault. So yeah, that's like really important, is to have your solid network around you.
Oh, I love that so much. I think you've just said everything perfectly for that. That is incredible. I want to ask, if you could go back and relive a moment, now it doesn't have to be positive, it doesn't have to be negative, it's whatever moment in your sporting journey, what would it be and why?
Oh,
It's a hard one.
wow. It's really hard. I'm trying to think, like, there's been so many good moments that I would love to go and relive, but I don't think you would get the same high that you got. For example, one thing that I really love is when we are successful in the two-man, because the two-man is a lot harder than the monobob because we don't have that standardized equipment, and also it's quite difficult competing with those bigger nations that have these big programs that have like the abundance of athletes coming through and the coaches and everything like that. And so there's a lot more elements to it that you need to bring together to be able to be successful. So one moment that I really did love was when last season, me and my teammate Kiara, we were in Winterberg, and we actually came 7th in that event, and that was my career best finish. And I messed up slightly in the first run, but we started at the back of the pack, and if you start at the back of the pack, you have all these sleds that are coming down the track, and it makes the track a little bit slower. So we've started in 21st, and then we ended up coming 11th, and I was like, oh, that's not so bad. Like I know I messed up like one corner that probably cost us a lot of time, but coming 11th is not so bad. And then the next run, we had the 4th fastest run, and we went from 11th, and we like kept making our way down all the way down to 7th. And that was just such a rush. It was so exciting because I was just like, oh my God, like we are just pipping off these girls, you know? And that was a really cool moment. And it just really made, because our two-man wasn't doing so well last season. And so that was just such an exciting moment. And it's a moment that I keep in my mind because I'm like, we can be successful in the two-man as well. We just need to bring all the elements together. And like Kiara and I did that day, and it was really quite exciting. And so I think that is a pretty cool moment. In saying that, like I said, I don't think it would have the same excitement. I don't think it would. Okay, there's one moment that I really would love to go back and relive, and it was actually when I competed in my first nationals in 400 meter hurdles. And I made the final, and so it was my first open nationals, and it was I think I was 20, and so it was so exciting that I had done this, and I was ready, and I was like feeling really good in the warm up. I was remembered I was mentally ready, physically ready. I was ready to go, and I had run the race of my life. I was absolutely storming at home. And I was getting to the last hurdle, so the 10th hurdle, and I remember looking out to my right-hand side, and I saw that I was in 3rd position, but I saw that there was a girl about to go over the hurdle the same time as me, and we would have been battling it out for third up to the finish line. And because I took my focus off for a split second, I tripped at the last hurdle and I hit the ground. And that is something that I just learnt so much of, that you have to just remain focused until the finish line. 100% focused on your race until the finish line, because if you take your focus off for a split second, you can hit a hurdle and you're done, and that would have been such a huge thing for me to be able to come third or even second, because I wasn't that far away from second at my first nationals. But yeah, I took my focus off for a split second, and that was the race over. And I always remember that. And even in bobsleigh now, like if I take my focus off for a split second, I'm like, you should have known better. You know better. And so that's a moment I wish I could go and relive. But again, would I have learned that lesson? I don't know. So yeah.
Yes, and I was going to say it's a hard lesson to learn, but it doesn't sound like it's harmed you in any way.
Yeah, like you learn from those lessons, you learn from those moments, and don't get me wrong, like I am hard on myself when I make a mistake, but I am learning to more make them like a learning moment rather than, a critical moment.
Yeah, and that's exactly, I guess, what the next sections are about in this podcast. So the next question is, what benefit has sport that you've learned as athlete Bree transferred over to everyday Bree? So like, how has it transferred over?
I think my persistence to keep going when things get hard is what's benefited me, like as an athlete and then also as an everyday person. There's things that come up that are really hard and you're like, I don't see a way through here. And I think that with sport, for example, I've just always kept going. I'm like, look, at the moment, I don't see a way through here. It's kind of like you're in a tunnel and it's completely dark. You're like, I can't see a thing here, but I'm just going to keep going. And then all of a sudden, like a light comes on. You're like, oh, thank God I can see here. And it's still dark, it's still really dark. But then you just keep going, and then, another light comes on, and then you just keep going, and then all of a sudden there's light at the end of the tunnel, and you're through that dark time. And I think that also has helped me in real life. Like there's times that, I guess, look, I'm not going to say my life is really quite balanced, because at the moment I am an athlete. Like I'm a full-time athlete. That's all I do. It's my work, it's my hobby, it's everything. But there is times when, like, you're trying to figure out just something in your everyday life. I don't know. For example, we're kind of like restructuring our apartment and like putting together new furniture, and you're like, I can't figure this out. Like,
flat pack furniture.
Like this is so annoying. Yes, exactly. IKEA furniture, it does your head in. But like you're sitting there, you're like, I can't figure this out. But then you sit there and you're like, hang on a second, no, let's like rewind here and look at the instructions again, look at what you're doing again. And then you just keep going and you keep going. And I don't think I would have had that persistence if I hadn't had those experiences as an athlete.
Yes, and there's a lot of people who do give up on IKEA furniture and flat pack furniture. They don't quite have the patience for it. I know I build it myself out of me and my partner. He just kind of like was like, oh yeah, I'll help in a minute. I'll help when I finish my smoothie or whatever. And I'm like, okay, whatever. And I'm like sitting there with the instructions up at my face going, how do I put this thing together?
Yeah. And I tell you what, relationships have been tested over IKEA furniture. I guarantee you.
Yeah, it's a testing one, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's before you move in with each other, just like make some furniture together and see if you get through that. And if you get through that, then you can move in together.
There's some good life advice. I love it. Well, other than the incredible IKEA furniture advice, is there a lesson that you've learned along the way that you want to share?
I've been asked this question actually a little bit recently. And it was advice that my dad got from a mate of his, and he was an athlete. I cannot remember his name. Dad tells me all the time. But he was a race walker. He competed at Olympics. And he said to Dad when I was quite young, just make sure that she keeps going in sport. You're always going to get to an age where, you know, other things become a priority, like either your social life becomes a priority, work becomes a priority, school becomes a priority, and, you know, sport can sometimes get put on the back foot. But just keep going in it. It can, you know, your priorities can move up and down, but just keep going in your sport. And I always kind of remembered that, especially because he was like, look, I wasn't the best athlete when I was growing up, but I just kept going and kept going and kept going. And then all of a sudden he was able to go and achieve his big goal of representing Australia at the Olympics. And as I was growing up, I wasn't the best athlete out there. Like, I wasn't, you know, always coming first at things. Like in little athletics, I was doing quite well, but you would then go to regionals and states, and I wasn't really hitting podiums. And so I was like, okay, look, I'm not where I want to be, but I'm just going to keep going. Then all of a sudden I hit year 12 and I could see all my friends dropping out of sport because education became a big priority. And then they finished like high school, and then they just couldn't get back into sport. And it's a really hard time too, because especially with women, they're going through puberty and changes in their body. And if you stop sport, then those things kind of take over, and it's really hard for women to get back into the sport. But I just kept going. I just, like, you know, it was my outlet during that time. And then I could see that my friends wanted to get back into the sport, but they just couldn't. And they physically couldn't, mentally they couldn't. And all of a sudden they were, you know, going to university, doing full-time jobs, and they were very talented athletes that just, you know, weren't able to go on and be even more successful than they were. But I continued, and then all of a sudden I'd get a full scholarship over to the US, and then go on and compete for Australia in bobsleigh, and the rest is history, you know. And it's just because I kept going. And so I think that's the biggest advice that I can share, is just always keep going. Your priorities can change, that's fine, but just keep going if your goal is to be able to, you know, reach the top level in your sport.
I love that. And it doesn't have to be, like you said, it doesn't have to be that top priority. So like while you're going through those years of high school, instead of training, I don't know, 8 times a week, I know in year 12, I got to April and I had to drop down, but I kept swimming. And I think that is the reason why I was able to swim in my 20s, because I kept going. Like, I didn't give it up completely. I certainly changed my priorities, but I was still involved.
Yes.
I was still rocking up to training a couple times a week. My times didn't really drop that much if we think about like some of it. And then all of a sudden I was beating the girls that were beating me 2 years ago, and they had stopped and tried to come back. And I look at that and I'm like, well, it's similar to you. Like, the sport lost talented athletes because they stopped.
And especially because if they stop, like, they're very talented athletes, and then they stop, and then they come back and they're not as good as when they finished, or when they took a break. And then that's really unmotivating for them. Like, they can't, like, get back in. They see no light through the tunnel, and then they just, you know, they're like, oh, okay, I'm done here. Like, that was me. Like, you know, I was the junior star, and that's me done. And that's really sad, because there's so many athletes that, they're junior stars. Brooke Stratton is a really good example. She was a junior star, and she just kept going all the way through, and now she's like successful. And she's honestly one of the only junior stars in track and field during my time that I can remember that has gone on to be successful. There's so many other junior stars, but where did they go? They all disappeared because they stopped during, you know, their later teen years for education or for whatever reasons.
Yeah, and it's just keep going. Like, I know getting those results, and we speak about it as an adult, like, you get, as a junior star, the results come really easy. We used to call it like instant coffee results. Every time you competed, you'd get better. I had a coach that told me that, like, you just have to swim and you'll get an instant PB. And I was like, oh, great. But then as you get older, that the distance between PBs, they come longer and longer. And to be able to keep going through that, just like you said, just keep going. It could be years between PBs, But if you keep going, you can still achieve the results.
Yeah, definitely. And you're always going to have plateaus in your career, but then that's a time to reflect. That's a time for you and your coach and your team to reflect on, okay, we're plateauing here. Do we need to just like push through this to be able to hit the next level, or do we need to make some sort of change? And then that's why it's important to have a good coach on your side that has so much knowledge on you as an athlete, but also on training, and they can make that call for you. And that's sometimes easier as an athlete if you have a coach that is good enough to be able to make those calls, because then all you have to do is just be like, okay, I trust you, off you go. And that's all about, that's what trusting the process is all about.
Oh, that's an incredible lesson. I really, really like that. And it's the same for anything. Like if you just keep going, even in life, just keep going, keep trying, you're going to get there eventually.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but you have to figure it out. Like you can't, there's sometimes, you know, you're walking along a path, but the path is rocky and it's bumpy and it has roadblocks here and there. You're like, this is a shit path to walk along. Like, let's maybe change paths. We can maybe still get to the same destination. It might take a little bit longer, but like, let's figure out a different way to be able to get there. And so then it's just about having your mind really wide open to the different possibilities of how to get to your destination. And that's really important. And I think that's where sometimes athletes get really stuck in their certain ways, you know, and they're hitting their head against the wall, trying the same things again and again and again. And I'm like, nah, just maybe like reflect and see if there's a better way to do this.
Yeah, take a step back and you can see that if you take 10 steps to the left, then there's no wall over there.
Exactly. Like if you've got blinkers on and you're only looking at one direction, then you're not going to be able to see the other paths that are around you that are all leading to the same destination. And like I said, like there may be different roadblocks on those paths, or it may take a little bit longer, but at the end of the day, you're going to get there at the end. So have eyes wide open and have an open mindset to different possibilities, and you'll get there in the end.
Oh, that's so good. Now, have you been involved in a project or an event where sport has been used as a tool to develop the community? Because we know that it can develop the person. We've just spoken about all those amazing things, but to develop the community.
I don't really know. I'm trying to think. Honestly, I was involved in a really good track and field club, Doncaster Senior Athletics Club. That was such a good club when I was there. It's still a great club, but I'm obviously not involved in it anymore. But the time that I was there, I came into the club and I was welcomed with open arms. I didn't know anybody there. I also lived half an hour away, and a lot of the people lived around that same area and they went to school there and stuff. And so often it's quite difficult to be able to get into a club where you didn't grow up with these people, and you had different connections and all that kind of stuff. But this club was amazing, and they welcomed me with open arms. And then we started doing social things together, and they became like my core group of friends during that time. And that was just such an amazing experience, because it was like we would go to training on the weekend, and even my friends in high school, like, you know, they would want to go out the night, like on a Saturday night or something, and I wouldn't be drinking or anything. They're like, why wouldn't you be, like, why aren't you drinking? I'm like, oh, because I got training in the morning. And they're like, what do you mean? Like, just come out, come have fun. I'm like, I'll come and have fun, but I'm not drinking because I got training. And so I'd go to training the next day, and I just loved it so much. And my high school friends would question me. They're like, why do you love getting up on a Sunday morning to go train? Like, are you crazy? And I'm like, no, because I have this awesome community that I meet with every single Sunday. And then we go out and we do stuff after training, and like we go to breakfast, and or we go and hang out at somebody's pool if it's stinking hot. And that was just such an amazing community. And it really was centered around our coach at the time, Tom Kelly. He was like a really influential person, and he sadly passed away back a few years ago. It was before I went to college, so it was back in 2013. But Tom just made this like big community, and it was just like such an amazing experience for all of us to be involved with. And if I do bump into these guys again, like we always just talk about the good old days, you know, and that was just, I just think that that's so rare to have like such a group of people that it's not only just your training partners, but they are like your core friends, and we all still keep in touch, and which is really fun. And so I think that's probably the only thing that I've kind of been involved with that's like also been about the community.
And it's really special because that happens in sporting clubs around the country, around the world, in different sports. Like I know I have a core group of friends that, you know, I swam at my first swimming club with, and same as you, the coach was a big
Yeah.
part of that, and we've kind of kept it going, if that makes sense. Like we still catch up, I don't know, a couple times a year, and it's 10 years since we stopped swimming together.
It's nearly 10 years for me too now, if I think about it, you know, like it's been such a long time that I haven't seen these guys, but if I do see them or I do chat with them online, it's like I saw them yesterday, and that's so special.
Yeah, and it's that, I think, I don't know, like I haven't been involved in music or I guess like anything else, but I think sport puts you in a very vulnerable position that you do make those bonds, and you do have that sense of needing, like you said before, needing people around you that understand what you're saying, but also like going through it as well. So though I find the connections that you make are so much deeper than just your everyday connections that you'd make in a cruisy, I don't know, workplace or something.
Yeah. And I also think like you go through hard times together, like not just like, you know, dark hard times, like you're getting all mental and emotional, but like you were grinding it out with these guys.
Yeah.
And there's one time that I think this like is a perfect example of like the community that we had. I would often go and train with the boys. Like that fires me up to like to go and train with the boys. And Tommy, my coach, he said, you like today you're running with the boys, and I'm like, but all the girls are here, like I want to train with the girls. They're like, no, we want to hit these times, and like you need to run with the boys to be able to do that. Okay, fine. And I can't remember the session. I think it might have been like 300, 320, 340, 360, 380, 400. Like I think it was something stupid like that. And so we started, and we got to, I think it was about 380 or I think it would have been 380. And I'm about to faint. Like I'm seriously like, head is spinning, mouth is dry. I'm like, I can't do this. I don't think I can like go again with these boys. And I actually like stood there for a second. I'm like, I'm going to faint here. And one of the boys has picked me up by the back of my crop top and has dragged me to the line. And he's like, come on, like, you're here. Like, let's go. And I'm like, I can't see, man. And I was like, I can't see. And then Thomas counted down like 3, 2, 1. And all of a sudden we'd taken off, and I can physically, like I can see again, and everything is fine, you know? But like I wouldn't have gone to the line if it wasn't for those boys that just like had got around me and like was encouraging me. And that session, I really felt like they were doing it for themselves, yes, but they were also doing it for me. Like they knew how much of a grind session that was for me. And that was just such a special moment, and you need those training partners during those sessions. And like I can remember at the end we were all on the grass just completely dead out, but like that it was just, we just all felt like we achieved so much that day, and it was a session that I'll never forget.
That social aspect of individual sports, like people who don't do an individual sport will be like, oh, you know, you're just out there by yourself, but you're really not. Like those training partners are the difference between you showing up and you not, really, for that last rep.
Yeah. I mean, look, I was excited to go to training on a Sunday morning after a night, like after I'd go out with my friends because of the social aspect of that club, you know? And so that pretty much tells you like how important like that part of sport can have, or how much of an influence that part of sport can have.
Yeah, and I don't see that changing, which brings me to the very, very last question. Where do you see the future of sport? So it can be your sport or sport in general.
I think it's really great how we're getting more grassroots sport. happening in Australia. Like, I think there's always been like lots of grassroots for football and stuff for boys, but I'm talking more specifically girls. And I don't know whether it's always been there, but there seems to be more exposure for it. And I say this because I talk to my friends now who have like little kids or little nieces and nephews, and they're like, oh yeah, they're like going to Auskick on the weekend. I'm like, oh, like this is so cute, like. And I know Auskick's been around for ages, but like there's more girls going there, and that's really like that's adorable. And like cricket and everything like that. There just seems to be more exposure around grassroots sports for younger kids and especially like little girls. I think that's really cool. For my sport specifically, I think there's heaps more opportunities for winter sports, which is really exciting. Like we're getting heaps more facilities, including there's a ski jump facility in Brisbane that's making it like way more accessible for aerial athletes and for moguls athletes to train in Australia, which is fantastic. There's a bigger airbag jump in Jindabyne, which is so all the snowboarders can go and practice their jumps there. That's really cool. And then there's even like whispers of a push track being made in Queensland also. And so that's just making winter sport training facilities heaps more accessible for athletes, which is then going to allow people to be like, oh, maybe we'll go and try that sport out there. And so I just think there's way more exposure for sport across media platforms, and whether people are just thinking, oh, maybe I'll put my kid in that now. And I just think that's really cool.
Yeah, and I think having the facilities in Australia, especially for winter sport, is going to mean that I don't know how many percent kind of drop out from that potential elite level because they can't afford to go overseas or they don't want to move away from their family. And you think about the talent pool that we'd lose there. Like we've done amazing in the in the recent years at bringing the exposure up. And now that we've done that and we're getting facilities in Australia, like imagine the depth of the talent field in 20 years' time. Like I can only see it growing.
Yeah, certainly, definitely, and that is a big thing. Like you hit the nail on the head there. Like for me to try and convince athletes to come over and give bobsleigh a go, they're like, I don't know, because like it's a long time away from home and it's a lot of money and all that kind of stuff. But getting more support allows people to not have to pay so much out of their pocket. Huge advantage. And then also, like, for example, if there's going to be a push track being built, I can take that athlete to the push track and be like, hey, go push a sled. And honestly, that's some of the best training, that's like the best training in the summer for me is push training. And if an athlete gets fired up from push training, I know that they're probably going to be like, they'll probably go and like the sport. And then also I can see if they're actually suited for the sport. If they're not so good at pushing on the push track, well, then I'm not going to try and convince them to come over to Europe to, spend a heaps of time away from home if, like, I know that they're probably not going to be good at it anyway. So it's just all advantages is having so many good world-class facilities in Australia. It's great.
It's very, very exciting. And Bree, thank you so much for coming on and just telling your story and inspiring. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of kids now out there going, oh, maybe winter sport is for me, especially coming from an athletics background. Like, I love it. So thank you so much.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Beyond Sport with Fiona Stewart. This is a completely independent podcast that has been created to share the journey and lessons of top-level sporting professionals, but also your everyday lover of sport. If you liked this podcast, I'd really appreciate if you could leave a review and share it with someone who you think would also enjoy it. Until next time.